So we're going to start on page 48 and 49, and it looks like this. It's called Center of Interest. So we're going to look at a bit of how do we structure pieces or position them so that we can understand how to create a center of interest. And then we're going to move on to how would we look at more of a full composition to really guide the eye where we want them to look. So the artist, author Charles Dunn, he's showing us here what tends to work versus what doesn't tend to work. And it's interesting, I'll maybe bring in I'll ask permission to show it and bring in an example from a student that I've been working with. I think she's applying to Rhode Island School of Design, and she's trying to go after scholarship. And she's been working on this one piece, and she really did this with it. She's got, and even not quite, she had this woman who's trying to fend off these coyotes that are attacking her with a spear. And the coyotes look, these black, menacing, angry animals, and it's kind of static, like it's a horizontal composition, and she's got so much space between these two main players in the scene that they feel kind of disconnected, and it doesn't feel, the drama that she's trying to create there isn't there, and then the contrast isn't in the piece that she needs either. So I'm looking forward to having the lesson with her that we're going to learn tonight is placement is one and contrast is one. And then the other thing is that we're going to learn about is this thing called the holding dark, of how do we get people to look at the main action. So how do we use contrast? So that's why we're going to start with position with black-white contrast. So we've got a bunch of black and white and a bunch of color things so where the eye goes first is to black-white contrast. Our eye is attracted to white things. So we always see the light first. And that's one of the things when we're trying to shoot video, we're always noticing if there's some bright highlight that's off in the background, it's really distracting. People are going to look at that, not at the person talking that you're wanting them to pay attention to. So we're always having to be really careful with our views. So if let's say that we have our don't, like we had the girl trying to fend off the coyotes, and she's mostly really light colored, and she's off to one side, and then she has these dark coyotes over here, and there's this big space, and where's the drama? And there's no contrast. You can't even, I wish I'd brought that in and asked her in advance, but I'll show you next week because she'll hopefully say it. Since none of you are applying to Rhode Island School of Design and competing with her, right? So, but if she had a little more contrast to really look at the main character, right? We want some contrast around the lady that's being attacked. So what we don't want is to have the black and the white separated by big space and just sort of floating, right? So, which is on the don't side. But the eye still does really notice the white, and then we notice the black too. They're both strong. So our eyes go to black and white first. So whatever is the most important, you want to have the most contrast to. And if you really want to make that white thing where the eye goes to be really noticed, you want it to be in front of something dark. So that's something to plan for. So decide what's the most important, and then make sure it's really bright, and then something dark is near it, so that it really pops out and then you notice it. So that you see how strong that is, that the eye knows where to go. Here, it doesn't really know where to go. It comes back and forth. It's confusing. So that's our first thing. So that if I wanted to, so it's pretty straightforward, right? I'm doing a still life. I'm probably not going to do it this way. I'm not going to have them separated, unless I'm making a comment that they just had an argument. They're feeling alienated from each other. But even so, I still have to decide where do I want somebody to look. So we still have to create contrast. So what you can do with, and maybe we'll get out some pencil crayons so you can color in what the colors are here. So I goes to the black-white contrast first. So if I'm drawing my container, I want my nice white thing, whatever it is, and it could be a person, right? That you got some good, strong highlights on the person's face. The dominant character has to be the brightest. So, and we need that, so that these things, these are just shapes, but they could be people, right? They could be characters in some kind of thing. And then we want the dark to be placed near it. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be the way this guy says, but he's got an interesting concept that he calls the holding dark, that we're going to work more with. That there's some weird thing about, sort of almost naturally, if there's a dark that's to the upper right-hand corner of the main subject, that's somewhere, not necessarily right dead center, because dead center can be a bit boring, but it depends on what you're saying in the artwork. Because sometimes we need something, you know how they always say like square is hard to use, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. And they always say avoid center, because that's boring and static. But it depends sometimes what you're saying, right? If you want something to feel really solid and focused, you might want to, but it can be kind of boring, it's true. More dynamic compositions are offside, 1/3, 2/3, that golden mean thing, it really does work. And there's something about the just off center and up to the upper right-hand corner that people tend to gravitate towards. So a lot of websites and advertisements, they use it on purpose, right? So, and if you use it in your artworks, it's going to just feel intuitively right to people, and they're going to look there. So that's why he's placed the dark object to the right side of the white thing, not in the center. So, because we want the contrast to be a little bit off center, so that's why it's there. So that's one of the first sort of, if there is a rule, that would be one thing that works. Even though I've seen lots of artists break the rules and it still works, but good to know what kind of works more often than not. And even if it's not an object, it might be a dark tone in the background that focuses the attention where you want it, right? So that's your number one priority. So yellow, because more light's being reflected off of it and less of it's being absorbed, it seems to advance. So if something's really important, you might want to have some yellow on it because it's going to jump forward, especially if it's got a dark, contrasty background behind it. And reds, oranges, any of those really also advance. Or greens that have a lot of yellow in them. So with that being said, red and yellow advance generally more than greens do. Greens are a little bit cooler and tend to recede more. But it's going to depend on that color of green, like what if it's fuchsia, or not fuchsia, sorry, that intense, apple green or chartreuse or something, and your red's a really dark red, then obviously the green's going to advance more. So generally you're going to put the color that advances the most in front and the color that recedes the most in the back. Or you might want to play with perception and, on purpose, play with what seems to advance or recede. So generally, the cool colors seem to create shadow or feel like a hole. They're really good for backgrounds or for popping something forward by putting it next to it. So you could create some wonderful designs in tattooing, I can imagine, with the brighter colors on some of the main elements and darker, cooler colors behind them. And painters do that too. They tend to use their shadow colors of the cool and the highlights of the objects being more warm. And then foreground, warmer, more bright, pure colors. And as you go into the background, you're getting cooler and cooler or less and less pure. And that helps to create depth. So part of what we're doing when we see complementary colors, did you know that their eye actually physically moves? The cones and rods in your eyes are actually vibrating. You know how they say that complementary colors create this vibration, it's really intense? Mm-hmm. It's actually something happening in our eye. So it's really cool. So if you want to say this is an important aspect and I want you to look there, and it's something about it kind of excites us because it's actually physically stimulating us, you want to put those two colors side by side. And the more pure and intense they are, the more dramatic the effect, at least for the short term. Eventually, as you stare at it, it dulls down because of that after effect thing. You ever stare at something on the wall for a while, and move your eyes away and you still see that image? That's part of what happens. So actually, complementary colors actually cancel each other out eventually in your eye. Isn't that weird? Anyway, so, and people like Mark Rothko, he used to do these huge stain paintings. He'd play with those kinds of ideas. If you're in front of a big field of color, what effect does it have on you next to the other color? And how at first they're intense and powerful, and after a while they subdue. So it's, and he'd play with that by making these huge paintings to see how they affected people. So, but anyway, so for your design though, you're going to say, okay, first I want super high contrast for number one thing, number two thing. Maybe I might choose to use complementary colors. And that the brightest one is going to be the out front, most important of those two things, and the cooler one, or the one that seems to receive the most, is the second one. So that if I was putting these peppers in a composition, it might, even though this one is smaller, because I like putting smaller things in front, it sort of works, I might be better to say, oh, I want the red one in front. So, because the red's going to jump forward more. So there's my pepper. And today's not about fantastic drawing. It's just, and where's my green one? I'm going to put my green one over there in behind. And in this case, this green kind of step really jumps out more than the red. So, anyway, so complementary colors. And the center of interest needs to be the lightest thing. So the brightest, the most lit area. So that, you know, this is a very simplified little diagram, but the area in the painting or artwork that is the most important has to have the brightest part, because that's where we're going to look. So, and so then he's got some examples down at the bottom. Just sort of comparing some of these ideas. You can see how you can kind of tell, like if you compare, oh look, this works really well. We got a high contrast in the, just off to the center, and you know, and it seems to work fairly well with the shadow being near the center. And if we put it off to the other side, it somehow feels wrong, doesn't it? To have that big space there, it just something that just, you know, that doesn't work. So some of it is somehow intuitive. I don't know why we know that we like this and we don't like that. Like you'd have to crop that off, wouldn't you? So the center of interest needs to be more towards the center and the brightest thing. So it doesn't work so well to have, see here we're confused again. There's so much contrast on both sides of that thing that, well, where am I supposed to look? We have to decide on a hierarchy. What's the most important? So this one off to the side works well. He's got high contrast color. He's got high contrast value with that holding dark, but a dark that balances it near the center with the shadow, and it all seems to work fairly harmoniously. I think it's not the best composition. I'd probably crop a little off and maybe give a little more space there, but we're not cameras, right? We're artists. And I mean, I admire great photographers, but I mean, great photographers are trying to bring it into an art form. It's not just take a picture, a snapshot, when we're creating an artwork. We're saying something in the artwork, right? So it's page 47. Every picture is not a painting. It's got a still life there. So a painting, it's thought about, it's felt about, it's decided upon. It's not arbitrary, just take a snapshot. And even those pictures that people take that's just snapshots, they're not compelling images either. So even photographers are looking for things like this. So what you see, like this little still life here is quite successful, and we can we can see where the artist wants us to look, that there's high contrast with the pear next to the really dark background and the white of the bowl. We've got, yellow and violet, so we're looking, this is the center of interest, and it happens to have that holding dark and high color contrast, high value contrast in the upper, just off to the center on the right side. And then there's a gradation of movement, and there's some interesting stuff we're going to learn about later in the course of how to use gradations, so that gradations aren't just, oh, it's light here and it's dark there. We can use it on purpose to create a feeling of movement and where we want somebody to look. So that's one of the things we're going to learn about. So if you notice here, so yeah, he's got all those things we just talked about all in one. And then he's got this gradation that, leads from lighter to darker. And then an interesting thing, an opposite gradation at the bottom. So it's creating this movement in and back that way, so that we never want the eye to go from one side across and off the page and look at somebody else's artwork, or go on to the next ad, or whatever it is they're looking at. We want to keep the eye circulating around the piece of artwork, whatever it is. So one way to do that is with two opposite gradations, because one's pushing in this way and one's pushing the other way. So then we keep them focused somewhere near the middle. That makes sense, yeah? So, and the other thing that the artist did in this painting, if you notice, the colors near the edges are more subdued. They're not the intense colors of the center of interest. They're more earthy, browns. They still have some of the same colors, because a good thing in a painting or any design, do you see how there's little bits of yellow kind of distributed throughout the piece? So you can find kind of triangular combinations of colors. There's still violet sort of distributed either as a sort of a circle. What we want to do is have low contrast and subdued colors away from the center of interest. So that may be off on the edges where it's less important. Like there must be a main focus part of your tattoo that you're doing, for example, that you could use more subtle colors off to the edges, right? So, my other favorite page in this book, which maybe, I guess we should get to it a little bit later. So, let's set up and just do a little still life with the objects that we have here, just practicing some of that and playing around with other colors. Like obviously you're going to use the main color thing, but you might say, oh, maybe I'm going to play around with some of the other colors too. So let's just, because learning happens by doing it, especially for artist types. You got to get in there with the stuff and do it, right? So I know peppers and cups and things aren't the most exciting, but it's a place to start so that we're kinesthetically learning it, doing it, okay? So what we'll do is, so each one of you can, because I think there's enough to kind of share. So we've got white and black things, and we've got complementary color things. So I'd like you to make some little still life exercises and just coloring them in really quickly and loosely. Almost like, you can see how quickly this little watercolor was done. It's quite loose. And just using your oil pastels to throw together a quick sketch. If you really hate oil pastels, we do have some chalk pastels too if you prefer that, or if you brought your own. So let's actually, maybe we can give you guys a few more minutes to work on this, and then we'll get them to you. Okay. So now that you've got your objects, you want to consider the background, right? And look at it and say, where does my eye go first? And does it make sense that my eye goes there first? What can I do to adjust where the eye is going? And you need to consider the background to be able to make that happen. So if you haven't shaded in your background yet, now's the time to start working with the background, okay? And then if you've already done, look at it and say, where's my eye going? First, second, third, and is that working for me? What do I need to do? Do I need to add some dark there or add some light over there? Okay, and then we'll look at them together. So an example to help you with this, if you want to look over here, so the quick little thing I did of what if I had, you know, a red pepper and a green pepper in a white bowl. So what I'm doing here is I've got high contrast on the red pepper, because of course red peppers are shiny, they got bright white highlights, and I've got a dark behind it so that there's my most interesting thing. Plus I've got a really bright color where I've added in some yellow with the red as well. I've made sure it's nice and contrasty in its shade and shadow on the fruit itself. And then the white bowl is contrasty near the red pepper. And that's where I want them to look. And then I have the green pepper just slightly behind it. And I've purposely made it a little less contrasty. And then I've got a gradation where the other colors off to the side start to blend and mute, and they're more grayed out and more